The bruise hadn't even finished forming yet when I understood that my family had never really been my family at all. I was sitting in the parking lot of a Walgreens on Route 9, engine running, staring at the lit-up pharmacy sign zoomed through the windshield. My left cheekbone was throbbing. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the gear into park on the first try. I kept thinking about the way everyone at that table had gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means shock, but the kind that means they'd been expecting it, that they'd seen it coming and decided not to warn me. My brother had gotten engaged 3 weeks earlier. His fiancée, her name was Brooke, and she had that particular kind of prettiness that made people forgive her things they shouldn't, had planned an engagement dinner at their house, big thing. Her parents flew in from Phoenix. My parents drove up from Richmond. My aunt and uncle came. There were maybe 40 people crammed into that split-level house in suburban Maryland, and someone had strung cafe lights across the back deck, and there was a charcuterie board the size of a coffee table, and everything smelled like candles and rosé. I didn't want to go. I want to be honest about that. My brother and I had never been close in the way people romanticize, no inside jokes, no texting each other memes, no calling just to talk. We were civil, we showed up for things. I showed up for this because my mother called me twice and left a voicemail both times, and the voicemail said, "In the way only my mother can say things, it would mean a lot to your brother, Lee." Not to her. To him. That's how she always did it, she outsourced the guilt, so I drove 2 hours. I brought a card and a bottle of Veuve Clicquot that was more than I should have spent. I wore a green dress I'd bought for a work event and never found another occasion for. I showed up. The first hour was fine. I stood near the kitchen island and talked to my aunt about her garden and pretended to care about her aphid problem. My father found me at some point and we talked about baseball, which is the only topic that has never once caused conflict between us. My mother kissed me on the cheek when I arrived and didn't seek me out again, which was normal. What wasn't normal was Brooke's mother. I noticed her watching me maybe 45 minutes in. I didn't know what it meant at the time. She was a tall woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a glass of white wine she kept refilling, and she had this expression on her face when she looked at me, like she was trying to figure out whether I was something she needed to worry about. I thought maybe she was just sizing up the future in-laws. I thought a lot of wrong things that night. My brother found me around 8:30. He pulled me into the hallway that connects the living room to the garage, just a short little stretch with coats hanging on hooks and a pile of shoes, and he said he needed to talk to me about something. I remember thinking he seemed off. Not nervous off like someone about to ask a favor. Something else. Something that looked, when I think back on it now, a lot like cornered. He told me there was a situation. That's the word he used, situation. He said he and Brooke had been having some financial stress over the past couple years, and that they'd made some decisions that weren't great, and that he needed me to understand that they were going to fix it. He was talking fast and not making full eye contact, which is what he does when he's lying, and I've known that about him since we were teenagers. I asked him what kind of decisions. He said they'd used my name. I want to tell you that I knew immediately what that meant. I didn't. My brain went through about 4 or 5 innocent interpretations before it landed on the real one, and when it landed, it was like stepping off a curb you didn't see. That lurch, that falling forward moment before you catch yourself. They had opened a credit card in my name. 2, actually. They'd gotten my social security number from a document my mother had. Something from years ago, from when I was on her insurance, and they'd used my information to open accounts, and they'd been running balances on them for almost 18 months. The total was somewhere around $23,000. I stood in that hallway, and I listened to my brother explain this to me, in the voice he uses when he's asking our parents for something, that careful, measured tone, and I felt something in my chest go very still. Not anger yet. The anger came later. What I felt first was this cold, precise clarity, like a window being wiped clean. I said, "Does Mom know?" He didn't answer fast enough. I said, "How long has she known?" He said, "Lay, let's not." I walked back into the party. I don't know what I was going to do. I genuinely don't. I think I was just moving because standing still felt impossible. I walked through the living room, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my face and my hands. I made it as far as the back deck, where a group of people, including Brooke and her mother, were standing around a table talking about the wedding venue, and Brooke looked up and saw whatever was on my face, and this is the part I keep coming back to, she didn't look surprised. She looked like she'd been waiting for her cue. She said, "Oh, here we go," that's all she said. Like I was an inconvenience she'd been anticipating, and something in me that had been holding very carefully just let go, I said, loud enough that several conversations stopped. "You used my social security number to open credit cards, $23,000. You want to tell these people about that, or should I?" There was a second of total silence, that kind of silence that has weight. Then Brooke looked at me and said, "You need to leave." And my mother, who was standing by the sliding door with a plate of crackers, who had heard everything, who knew, said, "Lay, not tonight. Not that was wrong, not we'll figure this out. Not even my name, like a question, just, not tonight." Like I was being dramatic, like I was the one ruining something. My brother came out onto the deck then and he grabbed my arm, not soft, not a please let's talk grab, but a we're done here grab, and he said, "You need to go home." I pulled my arm back. I said, "Don't touch me." He grabbed my arm again, and this time he turned me physically toward the door, steering me like luggage, and I said his name and told him to let go, and Brooke said something I couldn't fully hear, and then Brooke's mother, the woman with the reading glasses, said, in this very quiet voice that somehow carried, "She came here to make a scene, let her go." I don't know if it was the arm grab or that voice or the way my mother was still just standing there holding the plate of crackers, like none of this was her problem, but I stopped moving. I stopped letting myself be steered. I planted my feet and I turned around to face all of them and I said, "I am not leaving until someone in this family acknowledges what they did." My brother said my name like a warning. I said, "Identity theft is a federal crime, $23,000 across 2 accounts, 18 months. Are we acknowledging that? Or are we just doing candles and charcuterie?" Brooke stepped toward me, and I thought for half a second she was going to say something reasonable, and instead she grabbed the wine glass out of my hand. I'd picked it up off a tool somewhere without thinking, and she threw the contents in my face. I want you to understand something about that moment. The physical shock of it. It was white wine, cold, and it went in my eyes and my nose and soaked the front of my green dress, and there was this split second where my only thought was something completely absurd, like this is dry clean only. And then the room came back into focus, and I was standing there dripping on my brother's deck in front of 40 people, including his future in-laws, and nobody moved. Nobody handed me a towel, nobody said anything. My mother set the plate of crackers down very carefully on the tables beside her. I left. I sat in the Walgreens parking lot for about 20 minutes before I could drive. I called my best friend Cara, and she answered on the second ring, and I told her what happened in whatever order it came out, which wasn't the right order. She said, "Tell me you're not driving." I said I wasn't. She said, "Okay, tell me everything." By the time I'd told her everything, I had stopped shaking enough to think straight. Here's what I knew: 2 credit cards in my name, accounts I hadn't opened, balances I hadn't run up. My brother and his fiancée had my social security number because my mother gave it to them, which meant my mother was either directly involved or had looked the other way, and given the "not tonight" on the deck, I was leaning toward the former. Here's what I also knew. This wasn't a family problem. This was a crime. The next morning I pulled my credit report. I'd never pulled it so fast in my life. I had the app open before I'd even had coffee. There were the 2 accounts. There was a third one I hadn't known about. A store card, smaller balance, older, 3 accounts. The total was closer to $27,000 when you factored in interest. I called my bank. I called the credit bureaus and placed a fraud alert on all 3. Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. I filed a police report with my local precinct, which was uncomfortable in the specific way that reporting a crime against a family member is always uncomfortable. The officer asking me to confirm the name and address of the person I was reporting, me saying, "Yes, that's my brother, yes, that's my mother's address." I filed an FTC identity theft report at identitytheft.gov. I contacted both credit card companies directly with the case numbers from the police report and began the dispute process. I did not call my brother, I did not call my mother, I didn't block them. I want to be clear about that because people always ask. I didn't block them because I wanted to see what they would do. I wanted to see if anyone would reach out, apologize, offer to make it right, acknowledge, even once, that what they had done was wrong. My brother texted me 4 days later. The message said, "I think we need to talk about this like adults." I screenshotted it and sent it to my attorney. I had hired an attorney by then, a consumer protection lawyer who handles identity theft cases. She was sharp and direct and she did not mince words. She told me that what had happened constituted identity fraud under federal law and under Maryland state law, that the involvement of my mother as the source of the SSN made her potentially liable as a co-conspirator, and that I had strong grounds for civil action in addition to the criminal report I'd already filed. She also told me something I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "The fact that they're family doesn't change what this is. It just makes it harder to see clearly." She was right. My mother called me 2 weeks after the engagement dinner. I answered because I wanted to hear what she would say. She said she was sorry things had escalated the way they did. I said, "Mom, they committed identity fraud. You gave them my social security number." She said, "Your brother was in a really hard place financially." I said, "So was I. A year ago, I had to take a second shift at work to cover my rent. Do you know that? Did he ask you for help? Because I didn't ask him to open fraudulent credit accounts in my name." She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I don't want to lose my family over this." I said, "You should have thought about that before." I hung up. And I meant it. The credit card disputes took about 2 months to resolve. Both accounts were successfully removed from my credit report, flagged as fraudulent, balances discharged as not my liability. The third account, the store card, took longer because the company initially pushed back, but my attorney handled it. By the end, all 3 accounts were cleared, and the fraud alerts converted to credit freezes, which I'm keeping in place indefinitely. The criminal investigation moved slower, the way these things do. I gave a formal statement. I provided documentation, the credit reports, the account opening dates, the communications I'd screenshotted, including my brother's "Let's talk like adults" text, which my attorney found useful in a different way than he intended. Brooke, I later learned, had been the one to actually make the calls and fill out the applications. My brother had provided the information, my mother had provided my SSN, according to what came out later, had known about the first account when it was opened and said nothing. The fraud charges were filed in the fall, my brother's name was on them. So was Brooke's, so was my mother's as an accessory. I found out about my mother's charge on a Tuesday morning from my attorney, who called before I'd left for work. I sat in my car in my apartment complex parking lot, and I held the phone and I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Not because I was sad, I was past sad. It was something more like reckoning. The understanding that I had not imagined any of it, that I had not been dramatic, that the woman who'd said "not tonight" while her daughter stood soaked in wine in front of 40 people had known, and had chosen, and now there was paperwork with her name on it, confirming that she had known and chosen. I missed 2 calls from my aunt that week. I called her back eventually. She told me the family was devastated. I said I was sorry to hear that. She asked if there was any way to handle it without the legal route, and I said, respectfully, no. She said she hoped I understood what this would do to the family. I said I understood what they'd done to me. My brother's wedding was supposed to be in June. It's not happening now, or not on that timeline. Brooke's parents apparently had a lot of opinions about their daughter being listed on a criminal complaint, which I could have told my brother was a foreseeable consequence, but he did not ask for my input. People who know what happened sometimes ask me if I feel guilty. I've thought about it honestly, the way I think you have to when someone asks you something real, and the answer is no. Not because I'm hard, or because I don't love my family, or because I wanted any of this, but because guilt requires that I did something wrong and I didn't. I pulled a credit report and told the truth. Every step after that was paperwork and phone calls and waiting. I didn't invent the accounts, I didn't hand over someone's social security number, I didn't throw wine in anyone's face and wait for them to leave. The thing no one tells you about identity theft within a family is how invisible it is at first. It happens in your name, without your knowledge, and your credit score takes the hit, and you don't even know why. And the people who did it keep having dinner with you, keep calling to say they hope you're doing well, keep acting like there is nothing at all to account for. The crime is not just the fraud, the crime is the normalcy, the way they look at you at Christmas and hand you a gift card and smile, while somewhere a credit card in your name is accruing interest on charges you never made. I know my own name, I know what I did and didn't do. And when someone hands me paperwork and says sign here to confirm your identity, I can do that cleanly now. Because my identity is mine again. My credit score, for the record, is 31 points higher than it was the morning after that engagement dinner. My attorney got me a settlement from one of the card issuers for the way they initially handled the dispute. I bought a new green dress, different one, nicer, and wore it to a work event last month, and no one threw anything at me, and I drove home alone, and made tea, and sat in my apartment in the quiet, and thought about how much I like my life when the people in it are people I actually chose. That's not nothing. That's actually everything.